Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zobrio University's webinar on SE data entry tips and tricks to make your job easier. Today we have Crystal Haggerty, a senior application consultant here at Zobrio, to lead the webinar. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, which is located at the bottom of your screen. We'll go over all questions at the end. Thank you, and I hand it over to Crystal.
Thank you, Colleen. Well, welcome everyone. As Colleen said, my name is Crystal Haggerty, and I'm a senior application consultant here at Zobrio. So over the next 20 minutes, we're going to take a look at some tips and tricks to help make data entry a little bit easier within the financial edge. And I always hope if we can make things a little bit easier, we can also make your job a little easier, maybe life a little bit easier too. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up Financial Edge in the database view. Now, what I'm doing in database view can also be done in the NXT web view for almost everything we're doing here, but it's easier to kind of show you the steps and pieces within database view currently. So I'm going to start with database view and we're going to jump right in here. So first thing, sorry, I'm just going to move my screens over here. What we're going to take a look at today is customizing searches, moving your columns around. We're going to look at vendor defaults, journal entry defaults, and some other user options. And I'll try to throw in a few extra things as I go along. Now, right now, I have opened up the Financial Edge, and I'm going to start in accounts payable. So right up here at the top here, I'm in accounts payable. And I'm going to come down here to records on the left-hand side and vendors. And we're going to take a look at vendors. Now, first, I'm going to start with the search. Now, we have search in all of our record areas, whether it's accounts payable or general ledger or accounts receivable, any place within the system that's got a record, you've got a search area. So I'm going to click right here and click Open a Vendor. All right. So now the first thing, when you're coming into search, you may or may not have noticed that up here it says search using queries. So all searches within the Financial Edge are based off of queries, which is kind of nice. You might have noticed it. Maybe you've made some changes in here, maybe you haven't. I know way back when I was an end user working for an organization, somebody pointed this out to me and I thought, I've looked at this a billion times. Thank you so much. And now I made some changes. So right now it's using a default. All of you who have the system, there is a default search that's already been designed by Blackbaud. So you have that in here, but you can actually make changes to that. Well, let me show you something here. I'm just going to add in, well, I'm going to hit find now. And it's just loading everybody in here. So right now with this default search, I've got vendor name, alias, vendor ID, city, state. Maybe I want to see a few more things in here just to ensure that I'm grabbing the right record that I want to see. Now, again, remember, I'm looking at vendor records, but this can be found in all records. So you might think, well, in vendors, I don't have to look at too much, but maybe I need more information in invoices. So the same thing I'm showing you here, you can also do in other areas. So to the right of the default here, we've got our binoculars. I'm going to go ahead and click this little magnifying glass to the right of those binoculars. And what that did is it opened up this default query. Now, if you take a look at it on this criteria tab, we don't have anything in here. So if you've built queries before, that's usually the first thing you do. You define what records you want to find. Well, since this is a vendor search, it's automatically, we're pulling in a vendor query. So it's looking at all vendor records. I'm looking for a search and I can search over here. I'll move this over in through my search options. So my query itself doesn't need to have anything additional in the criteria. But my output, that's where all the magic happens. Now, this query, this default query, everybody has access to this. So one of the things you might want to do, you can either build a brand new query, or from this point, you could say, I'm going to do a file save as and rename this. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now, just because I don't want to change the default query that other individuals are using. I want to make sure that this query stays as mine. And whatever I change in here, when you're logged in as you, and you're walking through any of the record areas or the search areas, this changes that you make will come for your search areas. It's sort of like a user option. It's personal to you. So I'm just going to name this. Let's get my cursor in there so I can actually name it. I'm going to name this Crystal's Vendor Search. And I'm going to hit save. Now, I might want to see a few more things in here. So right now, it says vendor name, alias, vendor ID, city, state. But one of the things I might want to look at, I'm going to click open vendor here, is maybe I want to see when I'm looking at a search, if they're a 1099 vendor. Maybe you have added different information in status and you want some status information or terms. You can put as much information in here as you would like to see. I'm going to pull this down here for a second, and that's going to show up here in our search screen. Now, one thing you have to remember, if you put a lot of stuff in there, you're going to be scrolling to the right for a bit. But if it's going to be helpful to you to see additional information, then that's what you want to do. I'm going to go ahead and see right here now is how it says save and return to search. The system knows I'm in this search area, that my query that I'm pulling here is specifically going to be used for this search. So I'm going to say save and return to search. And now when you look up here, it's got Crystal's Vendor Search. I can always click the binoculars and find the old one. I can even go into options and I can say restore default vendor query. Okay, so if you say, oh, never mind, I don't want this, you can always click that option area and this button down here and restore your default query. So let's go ahead and take a look for somebody, because now I've got a little more information. Now, I'm working in the sample database, so I'm going to look up somebody, but I don't have a lot of records in here. But where my search might not be as exciting because I don't have a lot of records in here, although right now I'm looking at everyone. I'm going to hit find now again. I've got some more information in here now. Then it's helpful. But I'm going to pull up a single vendor, and within our system, I'm going to take a look at Mike Nelson. So in the vendor name, I'm going to go ahead and I can type in Mike. I can type in Nelson. It will come up. So here's Mike. You might have more Mikes. You might have more Nelsons. But in the sample database, we have just the one. I'm going to go ahead and open him back up. Or I'm going to open him. And actually, wait, before I do that, I just want you to take a look again. So remember, I changed that. I've got all this additional information on Mike that I didn't have before. Another piece before I go too far, because I want to show you this, is in the vendor query on the output tab, all the information that I pulled in is here. So I had the standard stuff, then I asked for the vendor 1099 vendor, the status, the terms, and any additional information. But if I get to this point and I think, oh, I don't really want alias here. What I really want is the vendor ID here. I can just click on this top piece here, the header of the row, and it'll just move it over. Anytime you have columns in almost every area of the Financial Edge or Blackbaud database, you can go ahead and move your columns around and just make it easier for you. If you're used to coming in and seeing the vendor ID, because you might know your people that well, that you're like, oh, no, I'm looking for 1041. Maybe you want vendor ID first, or maybe name first. Or you might want to have your 1099 vendor status moved up. So you're like, oh, yep, this is what I'm looking for. So far now we can modify and change our searches to make it a little bit easier to pick out the records that we want to see, and we can move our columns around so we know exactly who we're getting when we choose them. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Mike. Now I can either double click or hit open at the bottom, either way. And now I'm in a vendor record. So now I'm going to take a look at a few things that are in a vendor record and how these pieces, as long as you've got this information filled out, will then help you down the road when you're creating invoices, right? And we have to use the vendor record in our different areas. So first thing here is, let's take a look and see what Mike has on his record. Make this a little bit bigger here. So on Mike's record, we know who it is. It's Mike Nelson. We've got his tax information. We know his terms. So he's a net 30. I'm going to hit the little binocular. I keep saying binocular for that. Sorry. The magnifying glass. And it shows me Mike's a net 30. He needs to be paid within 30 days. I can change this here if I want, or I can change it actually in configurations and change it, make a different change here. But that can come into play later on. Also, his payment method. He likes to be paid by EFT, electronic funds transfer. His payment options, he likes one payment for all invoices. The account that we use is our operating account. And then down here, take a look. He's marked as a 1099 vendor, and there's a little check mark here. If I open that up, this lets me know what his 1099 distribution is. I've also got his address information. So I've got a lot going on just on his vendor record. As long as all of this information is here, I'm going to go here and click to activity and click new invoice. And put these side by side here. I'm going to go back to the vendor tab in that record and show you a few things. So coming over into an invoice, now I clicked new invoice through the activity tab on a vendor record. You, of course, can also create them through the invoice processing, but the same information will come over regardless of where you start an invoice for Mike. So taking a look at here, I know, so his payment address, this is, if I click the little magnifying glass, it's the same address that he's got here. So it's good to have that in there. You don't want to have to retype all of that information. Electronic funds transfer is EFT. This is how he likes to get paid. It automatically fills, so we don't have to make a change for that. Now on Mike's record, he likes one payment for all invoices. So you'll notice here that this create a separate payment for this invoice is not checked. If you want to, you can check it, and for just this individual invoice, it will be just a one single payment. Otherwise, it's going to default to what Mike has chosen or let us know, and we chose for him. Now take a look at this 1099 information. Go ahead and click that. It's pulling over the information because Mike was, here, I'll cancel that for a second and go back over here to see he's a non-employee compensation, South Carolina percentage. And when I come over here, I've got the same information, non-employee compensation, South Carolina. Now I don't have an amount in here because this is actually going to feed, I cancel, from where I put the actual invoice amount in, and then it will populate with the 100%. So this information is helpful. You don't have to add that extra stuff in. But one thing that I'm going to take a look here is GL distribution. Now, if you have a vendor who is, you pay them monthly, you pay them yearly, it's always the same thing. It's always coming out of the same distribution. You can actually set that up in their record and it's going to auto-populate in here. Now, I don't have it in here because I come back over here and look at the distribution tab within Mike's vendor record. He doesn't have any information in here. But I'm going to close this. I'm going to click back on vendor and I'm just going to close the invoice that I started. I don't need to save this because we're just taking a look at things. There's no reason to keep that open right now. And I'm going to make a couple of changes on this distribution area. So I'm going to add in here, let's hope I pick a good one. There you go, legal fees. I'm going to decide that Mike's getting, apparently we work with him with legal fees. That was the first number that popped into my head. So I can add in any additional information. If I have a project ID in here, I can add it in. I'm not sure which ones are correlated since I picked the legal fees off the top of my head, but we can go ahead and add additional information. What I want you to see is that anything that you add in here, this is letting the system know that this is the default. This is how Mike usually gets paid. I'm going to hit save so that information is in here. Oops, 100%. Gonna argue with me. That 100% comes back to his 1099 distribution. So Thank you, Financial Edge, for reminding me that I needed to add that in. So now, so that's the distribution. When I hit activity now and I click new invoice, if you look at the GL distribution, that information is already in there. So if you're doing invoices either individually through the vendor record or through invoices or through FAST, any of the GL distribution information that's on a vendor record will auto-populate into your FAST batch or onto the invoice that you create. It's kind of helpful. You can always change this. So if this time Mike is being paid out of something, another account, you can change that. But having those defaults set up is really helpful, especially for fast entry. If you got a stack of invoices and half of it can be taken care of because it's already built into the vendor record and it's going to auto-populate for you, you can get your job done a little bit quicker, maybe so we can leave on time, right? That's always what I like to hear. I'm always like, we worked a long 8 hours. We want to make it go by and we want to be able to leave on time. I'm not going to save that right now. Okay, so now we know, I'm going to close out Mike, that we can change our search. We can add additional information in to make sure that it auto-populates. So that's kind of fun. And in any of our search areas, we can move our columns around. Now, the next thing I want to take a look at is I'm going to go to journal entry. So I'm going to drop down from accounts payable here and change this over to general ledger. And I'm going to come here to journal entry and we're going to take a look at journal entry defaults. Now, I'm showing you journal entry defaults, but these defaults are very similar and you can also do them in FAST. Let me come back here for a second. Accounts payable. In FAST, for those of you that create FAST, they have very similar things that you can build out the same type of defaults in FAST that you can in journals. So something to think about. Either way, I always like when I can build out a little default to help auto-populate pieces to make things go a little bit faster, a little bit cleaner. So I'm just going to click new regular batch. Now, the first thing that we see, well, description, but I'm going to jump down here to our actual spreadsheet, or it looks like a spreadsheet. This top row here, this D row that you see here and also in FAST, this is the default row. So any information that's placed in here will default. So if I put in a post date, and most clients, I'm going to do regular for encumbrance. Maybe my journal, I'll say it's accounts payable. If anything is going to be the same throughout my batch, I can add that here. And as I tab through, see, as I drop down here to the line, it auto-populates with that information. Now, if I change this date, so say partway through, well, post date probably won't change. Partway through, I go, oh, well, I've got other pieces that maybe it's a journal and it's not accounts payable, or maybe I've added debit and credit accounts in here and these change. As long as you're within your line, see if can I still remember something here? As long as you're within the line, it might not let me do it unless I put other stuff. It will change this to 27. As I tab through, it might give me a cranky. Nope, it didn't. See, it dropped down and it changed the date. So if you drop down, you're like, wait, I changed the date. You probably had tabbed down here first, and that's why I didn't carry over. But you can change the date physically, and then all the rest will change. And it can be that way for any of the default pieces here. It's kind of cool. There's another thing I want to show you. So first, we know that the D row is the default row. And again, you have that here in journal, and you also have it in your FAST. Now take a look up here. So here's description, and then here's this thing here called default sets. I'm going to hit my binoculars here. Now you can create a default set. So if you know, depending on the workload that you have and the type of work you're doing, you might be doing the same stuff over and over. I know I used to be a data entry person. And I often had days where I was like, I'm doing every single thing the same. The only thing that's changing is the amount. So I can go ahead and create a default set. So I'm going to click new over here and see, it actually brings up the same information that I'm seeing across my journal entry. So I can add information in here if I know that it's always going to be a specific type. If I'm constantly, maybe my journal, it's always a cash management one, or this one will be. That won't be that part, we'll leave that. But any of the information that I put in here, I can now use by adding my default set. I'm going to call it crystals. I can move things around. So I'm basically designing my entire batch here that I use all the time. So if I choose to have my default set, I don't know if it's going to let me do it. Sorry. Say, okay. Oh, it did change things, added a few more stuff. See, changed it to cash management. If you have a default set, you can just enter that at any time. So you open up a new batch, hit your binoculars, find your default set, and you can have more than one. I'm an only child, so I always label everything with my first name. Everything's always crystals. That's how it is in the only child world, right? But you can create as many as you need, and you can let people use them if you want to, or you can keep them just yourself. But that's a really helpful piece to kind of speed up the default entry and the quick journal entry by using those defaults. Let's say that a little bit backwards. Now, being mindful of time, I want to take a look at a couple other things. So I jump back here. So first, we've taken a look at custom searches, moving columns, right? So now we know we can create our own custom searches. We can make them a little more personalized, and we can move our columns around to our likings. Whenever you see a column, go ahead on any page. If you're in your reports and you want to move stuff around, columns, move them around. Vendor defaults. We know if we add that extra information into their vendor records, their payment method, how they like to be paid, the 1099 information, address information, distribution information, that'll just make our data entry go a little bit faster. Journal defaults. We've looked at the D row for default entry, and we also looked at how we can create multiple default sets. So you can create different ones depending on what type of journal entry that you're doing. And don't forget, oops, I'm not going to user options yet, that the same way that we could do the journal entry, let me come in here, back to Razor's, I almost said Razor's Edge, sorry about that, Financial Edge. I'm just going to close this. We don't need that one now. So the same thing that I can do here in journal entry, I can also do in fast. So fast, if I do a new fast, I've got the default sets here as well. So you can design those same thing, create just the stuff we did before, create a new one, and use it in both areas. It's the same type of design. That's just to help with data entry. Now, one last thing I want to take a look at to give us all a little bit more information is I want to take a look at some of our user options. And there's a lot of user options. I'm just going to touch on a few, but something to think about is I've always recommended to my clients, and when I was an end user, a database administrator with my staff, would say, you know what, get into your systems and play for a little bit. Take 5 minutes in the morning, take 5 minutes at night, and look at an area that you don't necessarily look into, that you don't go to that often, and move stuff around, check it out. As long as it's not entry, if you're in reports, if you're in query or export, you're not going to do anything to the system. You're just checking things out, moving stuff around, trying a new report. Have fun, play in there. Another place to play, I'm going to click home here, is tools and options. So these options, and you'll see this wherever you are. So it doesn't matter if I'm in general ledger, you don't have to be on the home page. It's a habit. I go to the home page. Options, I still have access to my options. And these are my user options. They're nobody else's. So anything that you want to do in here, this is changing it for you under your login. So on the general tab right now, so my system has Financial Edge and Education Edge connected. But if you're someone who your job is accounts payable, you can say accounts payable. And then every time you open up the Financial Edge, instead of opening up to General Ledger or another area, it'll open up to accounts payable. So that's something that's kind of nice. You're not clicking that. Clicks don't seem like that much time until you do them all the time, right? Now, I won't go into detail about this, but we can take a look at this at a later date. Might be a future ZU where we look at how to make our homepage more tailored to us. But I did want to take a look here at records. And oops, actually, sorry, I want to get to AP. So wherever I am, it's going to give me a little bit different area in my records area. So under records, vendor activity, vendor summary, all of these pieces come back and connect to your vendor records. So take a look in here and see if there's something that you want to make changes for. Another area to take a look at is invoice activity, where the invoice is going to default to. So some of these can be defaults that you set up automatically. Invoice due date based on the terms. Remember when we looked at Mike, he was term 30, so it can be based on the terms. You set this up for you, the user, how you know your organization runs. That way it just sort of helps set those defaults up and make it a little bit easier for you. And just some fun stuff. I'm going to jump over here to color. Any of those areas where you see the different colors, you can change your colors. This is just a last minute little fun piece. And sometimes it might be fun. Maybe you decide today you're going to be pink. Now, all of my custom areas where I need to have information will automatically change color. See, now it's pink. That's a little bright for me, and I'm actually very attached to the turquoise because I've been using Blackbaud products for probably 15, 20 years now. So I get used to my colors, but it's kind of a fun thing that you can do. Make some changes for yourself, move your columns around, figure out which defaults you use all the time, and make that pieces easier for you. So user options, those are user options only for you, the user. The homepage is your homepage. Play in that user option area with the homepage. User options depend wherever program you are. Look at the records; those do change. Walk around on the user options; they're yours. Have fun. And just we're always here to help. Feel free to give us a call, contact anytime, and be happy to serve you. I hope you all learned a little something. There's a little tip or trick to make life a little bit easier for you. And I look forward to seeing you all at the next Zobrio University. Have a good day.